and this is going to be the introduction. Overall, the introduction to the layout, because before we can crack on and do any of the juicy stuff, we got to understand how to maneuver between the program, and at the end of the day, if you don't know what you're doing, it could be a real, hard program to navigate. So that's what this episode here is going to be. So first off, this right here is what the program is going to look like once you actually load it up and start a new project. And basically, you've got a few different sections. As you see, if we click a different section, it highlights this sort of blue outline around it, which means that we're currently operating in that particular section, right? So more or less, we'll start, I guess, chronologically, if you will, right? So first off, up here, what you have is all the different actual, standard buttons that you'd have in an actual program. Now, the actual file and edit, they're pretty universal. More or less, any program you go into is going to have a file and an edit, and we'll get into the different specifications of each of the options that they give you here. But overall, you've got a file, which is more or less dealing with the actual project itself. Edit, which is some actual, internal stuff, whether it be copy pasting and, duplicating stuff that ideally we'll be doing with shortcuts in the future because it's just a much quicker way to do it. And we'll be getting that to that in the tools and shortcuts section. Composition, which we'll crack on with later. Layer, which is all revolving around the actual different layers we've created down here in the, the timeline. Effects is pretty universal. This right here is overall just it's pretty straightforward. It's the effects. Of course, you can also access that in effects and presets. Animation, whole bunch of different animation-based stuff. View revolves around the layout. Window is, again, ticking on different tabs, so there's actually way more tabs than just the ones we have here, but these are the standard ones. And help, which is, more or less not necessary because I'm here to help you walk stuff through, basically. So that is the actual buttons you have at the top, and then we'll crack on with the actual layout itself. So over here is the project manager, aka the media manager. When we import stuff, it's going to be here. When we make compositions, it's going to be here. If we get a graphic and bring it in, it's going to be here. If we make, any sort of different pieces of media, that's all going to appear right here. And of course, it's empty because we currently have no media. You've got name, which is the name of the media, whatever the case may be. If you import a file that's file number 1, it'll pop up here under name. Over here is the composition. Once we've actually clicked new composition, which we're going to be getting to next, and we've actually built a composition, right? This is going to be where you're going to be able to see it. This is your preview window, if you will. Anything that we do to the actual project itself, edits or whatever, will all be able to be played back up here. And pretty much this is our live view, and more or less, I think preview summarizes it pretty well. Then we have over here, which is a few different option tabs. So we got info. This will give us basic info on our clip once we've got it loaded up down here in the timeline. Audio, which will obviously allow us to tweak different levels. However, that also can be accessed down here in the actual timeline itself. Preview, which can be kind of accessed through, just the use of the spacebar, which is, playing stuff, stopping it, skipping frame by frame, which again can be accessed through shortcuts, which we're going to extensively get to in the sections coming up. And then we have this effects and presets tab with a couple other tabs right here. For example, libraries, which is a variety of different assets and stuff like that. Again, all of this stuff is going to be deep dive. Now, down here is the actual timeline. Any actual layers we create, for example, importing clips, etc., they'll all pop up with their names right here. So as you see, source name, that will be where our clips, start appearing, or our shapes start appearing, or our graphics, our songs, whatever the case may be. So if we'd imported that clip that was clip number 1, and we dragged it to our timeline, right here under source name, it would appear here as a line, and it would say clip number 1. And that's the layer organization section, which is linked to the timeline. This right here, this whole area here, the sort of light gray area, is the timeline where all our chops, our cuts are done, our effects, etc. And this right here is going to be sort of the main area where you're actually able to influence stuff, next to perhaps using the effects tab, which is, working in unison with the actual timeline area. And also, at any point in time, if you decide that there is sort of a higher priority on each one of these tabs, as you notice the cursor right here, if we hover over these sort of dark lines that sort of separate everything, we get this different kind of cursor. And the reason for that is because we're actually able to drag out areas or tabs that we want. So for example, say that, we're editing a huge project and the layers are building up and we stop being able to see them. We are actually easily able to drag this up, for example, and actually at any point adjust the different tabs that we have available to us here. And we could even go a step further if you are not happy with the layout, which personally, I always leave the layout how it is based on the simple fact that After Effects clearly, or Adobe clearly spent quite a bit of troubleshooting time deciding that this was the optimal layout for editing. However, at any single time, we're actually able to go up here and actually drag and drop sections and link them to different places where we think that they might be a little bit more easily accessible. For example, say for some reason we wanted the effects tab right here, or for some reason actually we wanted the timeline maybe up here, for example. As you see, once I click the name of the actual section, we could drag it up here and, for example, drag and drop it, and all of a sudden we have actually dragged that into a different area. However, in my opinion, this is not optimal at all, and at any point if you do accidentally do that, because it happens to the best of us, you can go up to Window, Work, Space, and then go to Reset to Standard Layout, and just like that, it will reset at any time. So by all means, if you're new to the program, sometimes you might be dragging something in a hurry and you might accidentally drag it down here, and then you're freaking out that you messed up. Don't worry, a Window, Workspace, and Reset Standard to save layout. And just like that, guys, that is the layout walked through. See you in the upcoming part. Alright guys, welcome back to the Adobe After Effects Masterclass course. Continuing on the basics section, we're going to be doing starting a new composition. And in After Effects, there's a trend that I'm going to address now, which is that there's always more than one way to do something. So for example, we're going to break down how to make a new composition, but there's going to be a variety of different ways that we can actually do it. So way number one, arguably the simplest, it's right in front of us, new composition. All we'd have to do is actually tick this, or click it rather, and we're able to create a new composition. Now for the sake of just making the numbers go up, we're just going to call this comp 1, because obviously throughout the course of our After Effects course, we'll be creating so many compositions that I think it's a good way to organize it by just calling them comp 1, comp 2, comp 3, comp 29, whatever the case may be. And right below here, we have an actual, different specifications. So for example, right now, it kind of by default creates a 1920 by 1080p sequence. And that right there is just a standard 1080p sequence, right? But for example, say we wanted to make a square sequence, for example, maybe we would do 1080 by 1080. And that would be able to create a square composition. But for the purpose of this, we're just going to go 1920 by 1080. And this right here is an actual, width and dimensions, if you will. Now, down here is the frame rate. So at the moment it's 23.976, but maybe, for example, standard footage might be 30 frames a second, or oftentimes it's usually 29.97, which is close to 30 frames a second. So we'll just leave it on 29.97. And that, of course, can be adjusted depending on the clips you're working with. Some clips might be 60 frames a second. If you're working with, extreme slow motion, you might even be using 120 frames a second. But standard footage is usually about 30 frames a second, or 29.97. Down here is actually going to be the duration. This is the next most important situation you should be dealing with. Now, the numbers look maybe a little confusing. If you're looking at first glance, you could think maybe this is 30 minutes and 18 seconds, but it's not. It's actually 30 seconds and 18 milliseconds. The way this goes right here is the furthest number is hours. So at the moment it's 0, which is good. We're not trying to make a movie or anything. Next over is the minutes. And next over is the seconds, and finally is the milliseconds. So for example, say we wanted to make a 1 hour, 30-minute sequence, we would change the 0 over here to a 1, the 2 over here to 30, and we would actually make these right here 0, 0, and 0, 0, and that right there would be a 1 hour and 30-minute sequence. But of course, that's pretty huge, and we don't really want that. So let's go ahead and change the hour to 0. Let's change the 30 minutes to 0. Let's actually just make a 30-second sequence. That's what we're going to be doing for the purpose of the example today. Now is background color. Background color is the next sort of key thing you should be able to look at. And that right there at default is set to black. Depending on what your actual project specifications are, you might want to change that maybe, to a different color. But for the majority of projects, black is just a nice base layer background color based on the fact that the background color isn't actually being shown to the audience of the actual video most of the time, because of the simple fact that we are overlaying footage over the top of it, and the black might only act as maybe a cutaway or something like that. So overall, black is a pretty useful color to have as the background color, and for me, it's the one to go with. We're going to go ahead and press OK. And just like that, in our composition, our preview viewer, if you will, we actually have the composition pop up, and in our media manager over here, comp 1 appears right there. And just like that, we have created our first composition. But remember what I said to you guys. I said that there is never only one way to do something, and that's going to be a huge trend throughout After Effects. There's never one way to do something. So we showed you one way to do it, but there's multiple others. Now, secondly, up here, there's a composition tab, and composition has new composition. So at any time, if say we didn't, want to create a composition by clicking the button here, by the way, I've just deleted that obviously, we could go up here to composition, new composition, and we would be greeted with the exact same composition creation screen, and we'd be able to create another composition. Now, also, there is a third way to do it. So after we click create, which does the exact same thing. It's no different. And by the way, I'm just using the mouse wheel to scroll in and out to see this right here. We are actually able to create our composition right here. And of course, at any time, we also have the toggle transparency grid. So toggle transparency, if we were to click that, turns the background off. So this is perfect if you're trying to create overlays, if you're trying to create lower thirds, or if you're trying to just create something that can be input on another scene without a background. And we're going to be extensively getting to that later on. So I'll toggle that back on. For the majority of projects, we do not have the transparency grid on because we do want a background to it. Now let's actually go ahead and delete this and show you the third and final way to make a composition, and that is by going down here to the create a new composition button, which is down here. And we can actually tick that, and again, we're greeted with the exact same familiar composition settings window that we were able to access in two other different ways before that. And this will, of course, be the final way we'll do it. So we'll actually look at our sequence here, decide that, you know what, this is pretty good. The frames a second have changed, so let's actually just go ahead and make it 30 frames a second. Why not? We'll see how 30 frames a second gets us, and we'll actually just go ahead and press OK. And just like that, we have explored 3 different ways to create a composition, starting the trend that I promise you there is never one way to do something in After Effects. There's always at least 2, 3, 4, or 5 different ways to do the same exact thing in After Effects, and different executions of it. Although they're different, they still breed the exact same result. So that right there was the starting a new composition section. We're going to come back in a second with importing a clip in 2 different ways, continuing on this trend of there's always multiple ways to do something. See you there.